I'm Elle Embers, and this is Cosmic Curiosities. Hello, and welcome to Cosmic Curiosities. It has been a busy couple of weeks around here, and I'm so glad that you're all loving Season 2 so far. I've been recording lots of new episodes recently that I cannot wait to share with you. However, I will be taking a short break next week to focus on facilitating 2 in-person workshops that I have coming up with my team at the Self-Love Lounge. My Soul Circle group past life regression that's being held in Brisbane next Saturday, it is sold out. However, on April 29th, our team is coming together for a self-love support circle, also in Brisbane, where you'll get to experience some of the soul treatments that we offer, and I'll be doing some cosmic channeling for the group. There's still a couple of tickets left for this event, so I'll pop a link in the show notes if you'd like to come and check that out. If you're not local to the Brisbane area, don't worry. I'm getting ready to hold some virtual workshops in the next couple of months. So if you are interested in attending one of those, please send me a message and let me know where you are located so that I can do my best to accommodate everyone's time zones. But of course, if you are curious about building on your connection between your soul and you with past life regression, cosmic channeling, or energetic coaching, you can send me a message on Instagram or visit my website, lembers.com. And I'll be back with a new episode in 2 weeks on April 30th. Now, joining me today is author, journalist, and international speaker, Alicia Young. Alicia experienced a life-changing, out-of-body experience, which shifted her from the headspace of news to the heart space of soul plans. We cover some thought-provoking and beautiful concepts in today's episode, so let's dive in. Hi, Alicia. Thanks so much for joining me. How are you?
I've been looking forward to it, Elle. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, would you like to start off by telling everyone a little bit about you and a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself here?
Sure. Well, it's been a bit of a journey to get here, actually, to talk about soul plans and things, and I really appreciate it. Basically, I am one of 9 children, Catholic, right? And I was introduced to the idea of spirituality really alongside solid foods in my high chair, in the sense that I grew up talking about angels and it was just part of our daily fabric of life. So as I got older and got more interested in that, it seemed like a natural progression. I went to school in Australia. I left school and I became a social worker working in child protection and mental health, both fairly gritty areas. But beyond that, I'd always been interested in journalism. So after a while, after 6 or 7 years, maybe a bit longer, I went back to college. I became a journalist, and I've had 20 plus years of being a foreign correspondent, a local producer reporter, and an anchor in Moscow for a while. So I feel really blessed with what I've got to do. But most recently, after a transformative spiritual experience, I always say I'm a journalist who left the headspace of news for the heart space of spirituality. And that's what I'm most passionate about.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's such a beautiful transition and a way to describe it as well.
Thank you. I would like to say that I woke up one day and said, I'm going to come out as a public person spiritually, but you know what? That didn't happen. Often actually, courage is incremental. And after I had this transformative spiritual experience, I really had to weigh up a lot about the next chapter in my life. And I'm very grateful to have gone down the spiritual path. It just resonates for me on every level.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely relate. So I guess when we talk about spirituality from a journalism point of view, what sparked your interest there?
Well, I've had several spiritual appetizers, as I call them, through my life, which I believe prepared me for what I call the big event. For example, at the age of 3, I met my guardian angel.
That's beautiful.
As I mentioned, I'm one of 9 children, and most of us were out for the day with mum and dad. Now, this was in the years before mandatory seatbelts, and we were all kind of just squashed into the car. It was kind of embarrassing. We would pull up to a red light, and people would point and stare, slack-jawed, at how many heads were in the back of that car. And at the end of this day out, mum and dad said, look, we've just got one more stop to make. You know, your big sister's in charge. We'll be back shortly. My mother said for decades later, she didn't know how I got out of that entanglement of arms and legs and limbs, but I was determined to go join them. I somehow got out of the car and I was about to race across the road when I felt a hand very firmly on my shoulder. And I looked up, pulling me back from the curb. I looked up and I saw a man with the most beautiful face, Elle, the most beautiful sparkling eyes. His skin was brown and weathered, lots of lines on it, in a way that I now realize gave me a love of those facial features. And I looked up and I spoke as a 3-year-old does, with no filter, hands on hips. You're my guardian angel. And he smiled. I know, he smiled and he nodded and he faded away. And the next thing I remember was just being swarmed by grown-ups, people yelling. There was been horns blaring. My memory of that was that he stopped me at the curb, but people said no, I had begun to run across the road, and that's why horns were blaring. So I just felt that was him, and I can remember it as vividly as ever, decades on. So I felt like that started me on the path. If I can just clarify, I'm not psychic, Elle,
Hmm.
but I am, I think I would simply say that I'm open, whatever that means.
Open to the receiving of energy.
I guess so. Open to the idea of angels, open to the idea of signs and connections from the universe. I feel like every day the universe is asking us to dance. It's asking us to participate. And we have the choice, we always have the free will, where we get to, only operate from our headspace and do all our adulting, if you like, from our headspace, or we can open up a little part of us for that spiritual energy to come through. And I believe that's transformative. But I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's such a, like you say, transformative experience. And it kind of just steers your life in a new direction after that point.
Very much. And I'm very grateful for it. I guess what happened with me, when I say the big event, very briefly, was an out of body experience. I found myself on the other side. It wasn't an NDE, it wasn't a near death experience. My life was not in danger in any way. But somehow I got to the other side and I met a little boy there. He had a message for his grieving mother. I was no more than a go between, Elle, but it changed my life because in that moment I got to have just that glimpse of what I believe is our real home, being the other side. And I couldn't look at life in quite the same way again.
Would you like to, if you're comfortable, to go into a little bit more detail about that out of body experience?
Sure. If you don't mind me mentioning, this is a summary of my book, which is Visit from Heaven, a soul's
Hmm.
message of love, loss, and family. I grew up with a friend, a childhood friend that I called Jane in the book. And we always say, we shared the adventures of childhood and the giddiness of adolescence. We had all the crushes on the boy bands, everything you do with your girlfriends. But after school, life kind of took us in a different direction. There wasn't a falling out or anything, we just took different paths. Years later, we met up. I knew that Jane had twins. What I didn't know, Elle, was that she had lost a baby boy 5 months into her pregnancy, so her second trimester. When someone shares something like that with you, of course you want to offer all the support and sympathy that you can, but at the same time, there's really nothing that you can say or do that would ease that kind of raw pain.
Mm.
But we were grateful, to be in touch again and to know about that. several months went by, and my husband and I were living in Houston. We had just moved house. It was ridiculous. It was the shortest move on earth. We moved two doors down our apartment hallway after there was a mix up with our rental lease. So I'm there on an afternoon. We've just moved house. I'm surrounded by cardboard boxes and all the stuff that goes with, moving house. And I thought, I'm exhausted. I'm just going to take a break on the sofa for a while. I remember it was mid-afternoon, the sun was shining quite weakly, and I started reading and I got immersed in that. And then something made me look up, and I was no longer in my apartment. I saw a beach to one side with a sunset of pinks and oranges, and on the other side were sand dunes. Now, not to give you my life story, but I have what's called hyperpigmentation or chloasma. I was an egg donor and it left me with a sprinkling of darker skin. So I have to be very vigilant about sun protection. So
Mm-hmm.
while I'm taking in this lovely scene of the beach on one side and the sand dunes on the other, logic kicked in. And I thought, oh, I need a hat because I've always got a hat or a parasol stapled to me in real life. As I thought that and spoke it, I felt a tug on my tunic. I looked down and there was a little boy of 4 or 5 smiling with such love. And he said, "Don't worry, we don't have chloasma here." And I laughed. I thought that's a really big word for a little boy. And he said to me, "What age would you be more comfortable with?" Elle, he changed in front of me. He became an older child, a lanky teenager, a solid adult man, and finally an older man with salt in his beard. We didn't speak like you and I are speaking with our mouths. This was all by thought. But he knew instantly that I wanted the little boy back. So he took me through, very briefly, some past lives with his present day parents. And then I was allowed to see his soul plan, his pre birth soul plan, where he chose his parents, his siblings, and even his birth order. And that's what changed my life.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Thank you. It really did. I mean, it changed my life, and I'm very, very grateful for it.
So, for everyone wondering, what is a soul plan? What does a soul plan involve?
Well, a soul plan is basically your celestial blueprint for your upcoming life. And I fully respect that as we're talking today, as everyone's listening in with us, that we all arrive at this conversation with our own belief systems, our own values, our own idea of what happens to us before or after we're here as human beings. So please let me clarify, I'm not trying to tell anyone what to believe. I ask only that you consider what if? What if you designed this soul plan? So it's a celestial blueprint whereby you design your upcoming life. You design an entry point, meaning your family, and an exit point being the manner in which, of course, you leave this earth one day. So there's a lot that goes into it, but we never have to design it alone. What I saw was Bobby, the boy that I call Bobby in the book. I saw Bobby with his angels and guides talking through this upcoming life. I saw his parents step out from a circle of people into the middle of the circle with Bobby and his guides. Because free will is just as much a part of the other side as it is here. I remember the guide saying, "Are you comfortable being his parents?" Bobby saying, "Will you be my mother?" What I believe is that we design, first and foremost, the entry point. An entry point is obviously the family into which you're born, but it's much more than that too, Elle. It's the parents and their emotional and spiritual and genetic makeup. It is perhaps an ethnic group that you might belong to, which then in turn impacts your facial features, your complexion, etc. It's your culture. You choose any siblings, your birth order, the presence or absence of a faith. All these different things create your entry point.
Mm-hmm.
You choose the time of your birth, the country of your birth, the manner of your birth, whether your pregnancy was so called planned or unplanned. A surprise baby, a change of life baby, all those different things are chosen before you come. I often think, I understand that people come to soul plans with different feelings and backgrounds and points of reference. So I always ask with a smile, if you have children, Do you believe that you got random children, or do you believe that you got the children wholly and solely designed to be yours? Because they all arrive here with such different personalities. I love the fact that a baby is the size of a loaf of bread and yet it runs the whole house when it comes back.
Yeah.
It just amazes me. And they have their personalities so early on. Being on this earth for 5 minutes, they know who they are and they just spend their lifetime expressing that. So if soul plans feel, a little bit odd to you, ask yourself, if you have children, did you get random children, or did you get the children meant wholly and solely for you to shape them and them to shape you? Or if you're child free like me, look at your siblings or look at your parents or your closest friends and look at just be open to the design in that, the divine design.
Yeah.
And then after that, we choose what we call life themes, which is sort of like a university major, a college major on what you would like to do.
I want to come at you with a question here from a skeptical point of view.
Okay.
With making these choices, why would someone choose to be in a particular, let's say, for example, someone decided to come into a family of Jewish descent in a time where Germany was at war and the concentration camps and everything were coming into play. Why would someone choose that willingly?
That's a wonderful question, and it's a variation on one I get often. It's understandable. People think, why would anyone choose a life or come into an era where they experience horrific persecution, the likes of which we hope we never see again?
Yeah.
All I can offer respectfully is that from the other side where time does not exist, where it's eternity, if you like, coming here for a life of 80 or 90 years as a human being is honestly the blink of an eye. And it also brings up the part, why come here at all? Why would we come? Why not just stay over, whether you call it heaven or the afterlife or paradise or whatever? Why would we come here? We come here for our spiritual evolution, for our soul's evolution. So knowing that we'll be home in the blink of an eye, if you like, compared to eternity, we tend to design very engaging, very difficult life themes to experience while we're here. And of course, what you've mentioned with the Jewish people at the time of World War II is one of the most horrific in our human history. Those people, each of them, I believe, each of those souls were incredibly brave, the genuine definition of heroic behavior for what they went through, never wishing that on them for a moment, but what they went through made the world stand up in a way it never had before or has since. And we're, of course, naturally feeling the ripple effects of all that for generations to come. The idea being, of course, let's ensure that never happens again. They were heroes. They were incredibly advanced souls. When we choose something like a life theme, say of persecution or being a pawn, or the opposites, being a leader, being a good leader or an abusive leader or a manipulator, these things are life themes. Life themes are basically the main thing we choose to concentrate on this time around, always for the betterment of our spiritual evolution and for the souls around us. It's always a gift to the others as well. For example, if I chose on a slightly more frivolous note than what we were talking about, let's imagine for a moment that I chose a life theme of self worth or self esteem before I came here. I have a
Mm-hmm.
choice. I can choose an entry point, a family of complete cheerleaders who praise and support my every move. Well, that sounds like probably a nice way to live. But from a spiritual perspective, from the soul perspective, that's probably not going to involve as much spiritual evolution as a different path.
Yeah.
So imagine that I choose within my family, if I go to the woman who, or the soul who's going to be my mother this time around, and I say to her, I want to make a soul contract with you. I need you to be critical of me as I'm getting older. I need you to question some of my life choices. Now, it's not going to be in you to want to do that, but I'm scripting you a role here and I ask that you play it. We're going to butt heads when I'm a teenager or perhaps in my early 20s. You're going to question my life decisions. In doing that, you are gifting me a choice. I will either buckle down and say, oh, I absolutely agree. I had it wrong. I agree with the plans that you have for me. Or I can rise above and say, I love you. And this is a really hard time for us, but these choices are mine. I own them and they're important to me. Now, that might lead to a separation of sorts, some emotional distance, and we might find ourselves closer a little later in life, or we might find different ways to work through it. So we choose a life theme, and then to help that life theme play out, we then engage others in soul contracts to help play out that character. So, what I
Yeah.
guess I'd ask everyone to think about is if you can imagine in your life a relationship that's a source of pain, just ask yourself, what if I scripted this person to play this role in my life so that at the end of my life, I see the growth that I got from it. Because it's easy when we're really close with someone, you're really tight with a loved one or a friend that you feel an instant connection to. When relationships are in bloom, it's really easy to think, oh, yeah, we chose each other. Yep, totally see that. But when relationships are a source of pain and discomfort, it can be much harder. But if we look at it through this prism of soul plans, hey, I chose you, I asked you, I scripted you to play this role in my life, something happens, Elle. There's a shift. There's a shift from victim, where things happen to me, things are happening to me from other people, to more of a designer of my life where I'm calling the shots and shaping the major roles that appear in my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and you bring up interesting concepts there because it's kind of like you're looking at the bigger picture. It's not I chose this because it was easy or I chose this because it was hard, but it was this was going to give me the most out of this lesson. This was going to teach me the most valuable lesson through this process,
Yes.
and that is why I've been on this journey. So, yeah, I think that does make sense. That does bring forward an interesting concept.
Thank you. Let me add, as well as the challenges, we absolutely plan moments of undiluted joy and love. When a child is born, when we just connect with someone at work, whether it's minor or major things, we have designed a lot of those to balance, how difficult life can be at times. We create this tapestry of laughter and joy, but also challenges or maybe a period of financial hardship or unemployment, all as fleshing out our character, called Elle and called Alicia this time round, these
Yeah.
souls that we're putting on these physical costumes this time around. And it makes a big difference to just see how we look at the major events and relationships in our life.
Yeah, having that duality
Yes,
and seeing what one side is and the other side. And yeah, absolutely.
very much.
Yeah. So I guess what would some of the benefits be for us generally understanding our soul plans?
That's a great question. People think, well, okay, this all sounds very nice, but how does it help me in my day-to-day life? And I get that. When we look at our lives through the prism of soul plans, we feel, first off, much more the magnificent souls that we are, because we think, my goodness, look at what I have come through, what I have overcome, the barriers that I have worked through, the different events that have shaped me in many ways. And we see the magnificence of our souls in designing that plan. But on a day to day level, it can help us feel less ambushed in life. Sometimes you go through life and you think, my goodness, I just want to catch a break. You just feel like all these things are just coming out, right? One thing
Yeah.
after the other. You don't have a chance to catch your breath, and there's some new development in your relationship or with your work or with your children or all the hats that you wear in your life. So it can feel like you can't catch your breath. But when you look back and you think, wait a minute, what if I timed it this way? What does that say about the magnificence of my soul and how much I've designed to come to actually experience here? I am tasting everything before it's my time to go home. So, again, it can shift us from victimhood where things are happening to us, we're having to be reactive to other people, to more of a proactive stance going, you know what, I've designed this. I'm going to come through it because you know what, Elle? Life is a game we cannot lose. We can't lose. Even if we feel like, things are piling on top of us, this is a game we can't lose because we're all headed to go back home at some point. And I believe we're going to take off those masks and we're going to say to our loved ones and the key people in our life, well done. You played that role I asked you to play to the hilt. And sometimes it was really hard, but you did it really well. And I call that in the book the actor factor. If someone's causing you hurt or pain or just driving you nuts, ask yourself, this is the actor factor. What does it mean? How am I going to engage this person? This person's not actually trying to ruin my life. What if they are playing a role in a broader theme? How would that make a difference to how I view our interactions? If I might just clarify a couple of myths around soul plans, people
Sure.
will say, oh, wait a minute, are you saying that I chose poverty? Well, that doesn't mean you deserve poverty. We might design plans, but of course we get here and we become human and we have to exist in this human world. So it's not that we deserve poverty, but it's a case that if you imagine you're at the theatre, you're watching a play and you're completely immersed, you know that they're actors. You don't envy the king in the play and you don't pity the pauper. You know that they are playing a character. And at the end of the
Mm.
play, they're going to take off their mask and go about their lives. And that's us as well. The other thing is that people might say, well, wait a minute, my father was an abusive alcoholic, for example. Are you honestly saying that we deserve to grow up with that? It's not a case of deserving. It's a case of being aware, and I want to be very respectful in how I frame this, that perhaps their father was a soul who said, you know what, I'm coming here to experience this thing called human addiction. It could be an illegal addiction like narcotic drugs. It could be a more quote unquote socially acceptable addiction like alcohol or smoking or coffee. But I'm going to immerse myself in this experience of what it means to be dependent on a chemical of some sort. How does that affect my life, my relationships, my ability to survive? So it doesn't mean those children deserve that father, but it means that he arrived with his own things and they are gifted a choice in how to deal with that. Now, I respect as a child, you don't have a lot of choice, but as an adult, you get to decide what behavior you will mimic, not mimic, how you will raise your own children in response to that, how you are in a relationship in response to that. So it's just all these different variables that come into play. Let me add, a life theme is always designed to be overcome, not to be indulged. So it's not okay, for example, if I'm a person who physically abuses my partner, I can't say, well, you know what, it's not my fault. I chose it. I actually would have come here in that circumstance to work on impulse control.
Mm.
And some days, hopefully, I would make progress, and clearly, other days, I wouldn't be making progress. And that's the human experience. So I just want to clarify it's not an excuse to say, I chose this, so you just have to live with it. It's, I chose it, so I have to try to work through it. And as we know, some days better than others.
And that's, I suppose, too, where free will comes into play.
Yes.
It's like, I've made these choices, I've designed it this way, but coming down here, it's like, well, I choose not to do that this time. I'm gonna see what happens if I don't follow my plan, or I'm gonna see what happens if I do, or I don't, or I do for a little bit, and how that changes my experience. Because
Yes.
I guess if you're looking at it at a way of, we're here to experience the human experience, you might be an overachiever and you might want to experience a lot in the time that you're here. And
Yes.
and have, lots of different experiences dealing with all these things that we consider to be a horrible experience. And, oh, you don't deserve this, but it's something that you were so wanting to experience, just being on this realm, being on this planet, being human and going through this experience. What does it feel like? What does it not feel like? And then that way, when we do go home and we've had that experience and we go, oh, okay, that's where we can compare. Well, this wasn't such a great experience. I didn't quite like that experience, but I liked this one. So maybe I'll come back and do this one, or there was a little bit left there I didn't get to do. I want to try that again.
Absolutely. You've captured it beautifully, Elle, and that is that essence of I just want to come and experience this full human condition. I want to know what power feels like and whether I use that for good or for to manipulate others. I want to experience powerlessness, whether it's financial powerlessness, temporarily or permanently, permanently being, in the human life. What do I do with that? Does it send me down a different path to be much more creative, or does it affect, how does it affect how I parent? Do I do everything I can to make sure my children don't experience what I experienced? There are just thousands of different variables, and every choice that we make in every waking moment is like those butterfly wings and can affect everything else that we just, often are never aware of.
Mm.
If I may just clarify, there are different schools of thought on this, but my understanding is that we don't come here choosing to be abused, but we do come here in a circumstance in which that might play out.
Yeah.
If that makes sense? So it's not that I choose to be abused, for example. No one deserves that. Clearly no one deserves that. But we might choose a circumstance where our partner is dealing with impulse control. Perhaps there's an addiction issue there as well. And as horrific as it sounds, the soul is still gifted a choice to say, enough, I am leaving, or I'm going to stay and try to make it better, or I really want to leave, but I just don't feel emotionally, psychologically, financially that that's an option. And what does that mean for my future here on earth for the rest of this life? So there are just thousands of variables. It's highly nuanced.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how is that done? How is a soul plan reading performed?
Well, there's several ways to do it. The way that I do it, as I explained, I'm not a psychic. What I do, it takes about 2 hours. And the first half is really a detailed social history. We're looking at your parents and your relationship with them, your siblings, your birth order, all of which were chosen as your entry point. We look at the main relationships that you have. And what we're looking for is the dynamics that help us reveal life themes, the life themes and the soul contracts. So in the second half of the session, we then look at some of the key relationships and say, let's look at this through the prism of soul plans. What if you chose this person? These circumstances played out in a particular way. They shaped who you are today. You get to decide how much you take moving forward. People come oftentimes as a curiosity to look at what theirs is, but it's also just very healing, Elle. So people say, what if this person, this brother or this parent figure played such a pivotal role in my life that I've always thought of as a negative? What if I can reframe that? How does that help me moving forward? How does that lighten my load spiritually? How does it change any relationship I have with them moving forward? For us to say, actually, with the actor factor, we are just playing these characters at the moment. And people tell me it is very freeing. Yeah, they feel lighter afterwards. And it's a genuine honor just to share what I saw on the other side and what it means for us back here.
Yeah, so it kind of, in a way, then puts things into perspective because, for example, if you had a parent who jumped from job to job, didn't have that sense of financial security, maybe you saw that as a negative experience. But in reality, what you've actually learnt from that was to be open to new opportunities that come around.
Yes.
They've had a better offer, or they've had a new passion or a new idea, and just being open and fluid to change rather than sticking into a rigid career that you're unhappy with for all of your life. And you never realized that because you never connected the dots.
Very much. Actually, in fact, there's a phrase my clients often use that they're helping to connect the dots that were there in plain sight. Just as an example, I happen to have three different clients in different countries of the world they've never met, but they're presenting, I don't say a presenting issue, just a presenting story, was that in each case, in these different countries around the world, when they looked back, themselves, their mothers, their grandmothers, at least three generations, had all been abandoned by their partners while heavily pregnant. They were all around 8, 9 months pregnant, and their partners just left for a variety of reasons. And I remember one lady saying to me, I'm here to break that pattern. And I'm here to break that pattern in the sense of generations ago, when a woman was much more reliant on a partner to survive economically and socially and all the rest of it. She said, okay, this has happened to me. I've seen my mother and grandmother suffer irreparably for that, social pariahs and all the rest of it. This has happened to me. I can't control that my partner left, but I get to decide how or if it defines me at all,
Yeah.
how I survive this circumstance, how my child is witnessing me dealing with this as he or she gets older, and what that means for our family. And she was very clear that she was here this time around to break that cycle of emotional, physical, financial dependence on someone else. Imagine your partner leaving. When you're 8 or 9 months pregnant, you're physically incredibly vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable, and you've got this major life transition happening, and he takes off.
Yeah.
So it's just, they said in their soul group, she felt very strongly this was a part of their soul group to work on this theme together of emotional independence, of emotional resilience and survival for the spiritual evolution, not just of my client, but of her soul companions as well.
Yeah. Wow. That's huge. Yeah.
It's big. It's really big. I think it shows our interconnection.
Mm.
I've worked with others who have had different types of cancer in the same in the same for a family of origin, but all quite different cancers. And one client said, "Look, I feel like we've come to experience this human condition that we call cancer. I know it's an umbrella term for all manner of illnesses." Yeah, and she said, "When I look back, she said her siblings have all had it. She's had it. Her parents have each had cancer, but they've all dealt with it in incredibly individual ways. One got clinically depressed, another became an activist, was out there to medically fundraise and doing all manner of things. So there's just all these different ways of coping, toward a similar event. And we all
Yeah.
get to experience it ourselves, and we all get to witness how everyone else is dealing with this experience. So it's just a fascinating prism by which to view our lives.
So we go through a bit more of a social background on our story,
Yes.
but how is it that we understand these terms or come to understand these events? Is that more of an individual process, or is there sort of a way that it comes about?
Well, it is a lot of talking. And what I do is it's a combination, really. When I look back, the soul plan sessions bring in my social work background, which is taking the social history. It incorporates the journalism side, which is asking all the questions. And then finally, it wraps up with the spiritual side. So I'm delighted and grateful for that. But it really is that first hour is just talking about you, about your childhood, about your main influences in your life. You would be amazed at the so-called little events that come out that you don't think at the time are particularly major in your life, but
Yeah.
they're not particular milestones, and yet they're little moments when you know that you're close to someone, or that you'll never be close to someone, or that you're the black sheep of the family, all these labels that we sprinkle over each other as a kind of shorthand. Then I sit down and we look at and map out the different relationships and say, well, okay, what about this? Your relationship with your father began in this way, and yet at the end of his life, he demanded that it was you that helped him transition. It was you that saw him at his most vulnerable, as a weakened physical state, as he was preparing to go home, the ravages of cancer or whatever it was. And the black sheep steps up and sees themselves in a different light. So it's a very
Mm.
healing experience, I'm told. It's a very empowering experience, particularly if you've ever felt labeled by your family of origin. Oh, she's the clown. She's too, flighty. He's the golden child. We use these labels as a sort of shorthand, and they do us a tremendous disservice because they paint us in broad strokes, when in fact we are just so much more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
One client has dealt with, lost her mother at the age of 4, her father in her teen years, and she threw up her hands in her 20s and said, "What else have you got for me? I cannot do this anymore." And spent, years in with clinical depression and that kind of thing. She eventually, with the help of medical professionals and psychologists, she was able to emerge from that. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh, as a child, obviously that's the worst thing to go through, is to lose." your parents, the ones who are there to love you, guide you, protect you, provide for you. She said, but I wouldn't be the woman I am now without that experience. And of course, it's shaped the woman she is now, the woman she'll be in the future, how she is in relationships, how she mothers her own children. So we pack our soul plans full of all these experiences. Let me say, we plan these events not for the suffering it entails, but for the spiritual growth it affords. That's huge. And we understand that later.
Yeah, and having it facilitated by someone who has that outsider perspective. They haven't had that connection with you previously to create their own opinions and assumptions and feelings towards
Yes,
certain things.
we do meet at that neutral point.
Yeah, that is kind of, relieving to think that, well, hey, without biased opinion, this is what it portrays.
Well, this is what I don't tell anyone what they have to feel, but we just uncover and reveal and excavate all these different things that have been in the background for a while that we bring to the surface. And then, of course, it's because of my trip to the other side that I'm able to explain to them what I saw beyond the book, what the importance and the sheer love that goes into all of this, because that's what it is. Even when we live a life of difficulty and challenges, we do it and we design it through the powerful souls that we are to have this human experience.
And it's such a beautiful concept as well to really look at the bigger picture of what our lives mean, like what the human experience involves.
Thank you, Elle.
But before we wrap up, I'd just like to ask you as well, what is your favorite inspiring quote?
Sure, I think it would have to be because it does change, right? It's like kind of flavor of the month. We'll sit with one for a few months and we put it aside. The one I'm loving at the moment, I think, is Eckhart Tolle. And he says, we're all souls just walking around as humans for a while. I love it because it just kind of reminds us everything is temporary. Whatever we're going through right now, the challenges will pass and the joys will pass. So we need to really enjoy them in the present moment. So, that sense of everything is temporary and it takes the sting out of the challenges, I think, the really bad days. But it also is a reminder that when we have a wonderful family celebration or something that just makes our heart sing, we should really just press the pause button and enjoy that for what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's so great. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing about soul plans. That's amazing.
Thanks, Elle.
If anyone's wanting to work with you and find out their particular soul plan or find out a bit more about your outer body experience with your book, where can they find you?
Thank you. The easiest way is probably through soulplans.net, which is my website, or on social media. I'm simply author Alicia Young. So thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, this is your Earthside Spirit Guide signing off for the week. If you'd like to know more about how you can work with me, you can follow me on Instagram at l.embers or visit my website lembers.com.